Welcome to the Convergence Coaching Inspired Ideas podcast. Join us as we explore great leadership and management ideas that apply within the accounting profession and in other aspects of life and business too. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Inspired Ideas podcast. This is Brianna Johnson. I'm a consultant with Convergence Coaching. And today I have with me Aaron Ackerman with Hogan Taylor. And Aaron is a partner. Hogan Taylor is an IPA top 100 firm. And Aaron is passionate about helping clients solve their hardest problems. He leads the advisory practice in the Oklahoma City market, and he launched that practice in 2014. Prior to joining Hogan Taylor, Aaron spent 10 years serving as a controller or CFO for several different Oklahoma City companies, including one of the largest private companies in the U.S. and a private equity-backed startup. So we're excited to have Aaron here. Aaron, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Excited to be on the show.
Great. Yeah. So we always like to start off our podcasts with a question for you, and that is, what inspires you most in your life or work?
That is an interesting and a good question. So I think as I've gotten a little older and moved in my career, perspectives and priorities have shifted. For the last several years, I've just really felt like whether it's work or life or the other things we just do outside, it's all about relationships. And so really building meaningful relationships with my clients, with my coworkers, with my family and friends, that just keeps rising higher and higher on the list of things that matter to me as I get older. And so I would say just great relationships. That's what inspires me.
I love that. Well, and especially in the workplace, when you build great relationships in the workplace, I think that's when it stops feeling like work.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I am really excited to talk with you today and for our listeners to hear this conversation. We are going to talk about some things that you've been doing at your firm in terms of consulting and also creating this advisory mindset, this entrepreneurial mindset. I, at Convergence Coaching, am involved with the Rainmaker Development Program. And so I have a personal interest in some of the work that you were doing in terms of building a rainmaking culture at Hogan Taylor. If you could share with our listeners what your project entailed focusing on rainmaking in your firm and in how you were making that part of the culture at Hogan Taylor. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you bet. So really, it kind of started before I joined into the TLP program, but our CEO, Randy Nail, who is be a great guest for your podcast, actually, he is just an awesome leader, really big vision kind of guy.
Yeah.
He had come to me and said, I want to, and I hesitate to use the word change our culture because Hogan Taylor has a phenomenal culture, but he said we need to enhance our culture around business development. And like a lot of firms, you kind of end up with a handful of partners that are kind of the rainmakers and, our cowboys. They go out and do it on their own and they're bringing in a lot of work, but we didn't really have a pervasive culture of real collaborative business development at all levels. And so that's one thing that we're really interested in is really enhancing and building out this culture of business development is something that everybody from staff to partners participate in different ways. And so that's kind of what we set out to do. It folded in perfectly as a TLP project. And so, tweaking or enhancing a culture is really hard. And so I spent a lot of time just kind of studying, reading books about culture, trying to figure out like, how do you do this? Because we didn't want it to be something that we talked about. We created a logo or a list of bullet points, and then it just got in the drawer and never really acted on and became just another thing that we talked about for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
It needed to be really impactful. And so we wanted to do it right. And so I love to read, and I came across a couple of books that I think are kind of the gold standard for anybody who's involved in shaping and enhancing culture. And I'll just mention those real quick. One is Culture Code by Dan Coyle. Really cool book. The other one that's kind of just become my Bible as far as culture goes is called Switch, and it's by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's almost more like a field manual. It's very practical. It gives a lot of strategies about how to do culture right. And so I leaned heavily on concepts from that book. But we really see this as a kind of a multi-year effort. And so it's been challenging to kind of distill that into actionable steps that need to happen, milestones that need to happen in, year one and things like that. So when Randy first came to me and said, we need to enhance our culture, like go do it, I'm like, okay, I don't even know where to start. Like
Right.
that's a big audacious goal. So how do you start? Like how do you do that? So we broke it down into things we could do first, second, third, et cetera. And really, during TLP and even still now, we've kind of focused on what I kind of call phase one. And and I'll tell you what phase one entails. It's sort of three prongs of things that we can take action on and measure and really monitor. And but stepping back a little bit, like a lot of accounting firms and professional service firms, business development is not really something expected of people early in their career. You get all of your accolades and your raises and bonuses based on advancing your technical skills.
Right.
And then you get to a point in your career where all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, you want to become a partner or senior manager, you need to go develop business, but we've never really invested in you to
Yeah.
this point.
Surprise.
So yeah,
Yes.
it's the big surprise. So one of the things we want to do is really roll that down all the way to new staff. And one of the ways we're going to do that is really aligning goals with the message of we are a firm that has a really strong business development culture that everybody participates in. And so probably in year two, so like probably 2021, every single client facing person at Hogan Taylor is going to have a formal business development goal that will get measured. It will be part of their review. It will impact their compensation. And so one thing we want to do is just make that accountability really align with our goals. And it could be for a new staff, it might be their goal might be to go with a partner to a meeting and take notes 4 times this year. Like it could be as simple as that. For a partner that's been developing business for a long time and has a huge network, it could be bringing in $200,000 or $300,000 of new work, and anything in between. So it's not necessarily everybody's got to go cold call, meet with prospects, or network like a champ.
Right.
It could be very, very simple. And one of the things that inspired me on that was really the gradual release of responsibility model that I learned from Jen and Tamara and the Convergence Coaching Group, where it's the way we do things just sort of inherently, but they put a vocabulary to it in a model, which really made a lot of sense. Where if I'm kind of the teacher, the experienced person, and I bring a new person in, I'm going to do it and they're going to watch me. And then I'm going to do it, they're going to help me. And then they're going to do it, I'm going to help them. And then they're going to do it, I'm going to watch them. And then you've kind of completed that cycle. So that's really the goal, is that we want people to just become part of business development in some way, small or big. So that's a big piece of it. The other thing that we did, just from sort of having the right tools, is we've never had at Hogan Taylor a true CRM tool or platform. And so we have implemented HubSpot, which helps us really manage contacts and deals, proposals, like that whole pipeline is now digitized and tracked. And so that's a big piece of it. And so we're trying to let that become as much a habit of our everyday life at Hogan Taylor as historically, like entering time into a time system is. So, so that's part of it too. So it's kind of just phasing in. And really what we want to do early on is reward and celebrate effort, not so much results. So if somebody's goal is, to go on 4 networking events this year, we're going to celebrate that they went to the 4 networking events. Like they met that goal. The goal wasn't that anything came out of that. That would be sort of the next, graduate to the next step. I think one of the most important things is taking business development out of the black box for people and demystifying it. So a lot of people are just scared by that. I'm not a natural extrovert, so I think I can't be good at that. Or I've never learned, or whatever. I'm very nervous about going and trying to introduce myself in a crowd. So we want to just demystify business development, because there's a lot of ways to participate in it. One way is just delivering great service, asking really good questions of your clients, and then listening. That turns into more work. That's business development. And in fact, I had an instance where I had a manager who had a goal of wanting to bring in new revenue, and we got to his performance review, and he had marked himself as that he failed that goal. And I said, "Why did you say you failed that goal?" And he said, "Well, I didn't bring in any new clients." I said, "But you worked on this client every month. That was a $4,000 a month client. It's a pretty good client, but you delivered great service. You asked great questions, and we solved problems. And now they're a $7,500 a month client." I said, that's a huge win. Like, I think you had a great business development win. And so what we want to do is tell stories like that within the firm, and really just show, like, hey, we're already doing this. You're doing this. And we want to show you how that is a big business development win, and just take some of the scariness out of it for people that, see that as something intimidating.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the most common thing I think we hear from people when it comes to business development, is this response of, I went into public accounting thinking I wouldn't have to do sales. What, to your point, there are many ways to contribute to the firm's revenue. What you mentioned, that example of not really placing the same emphasis on existing client revenue, that's sad. I think sometimes firms do place a lot of like the glory around, bringing in new clients, sourcing new clients. And of course, that's important. We need that type of growth, but the existing client retention is so key. A lot of times our client servers, they don't realize that role that they're playing in business development just by being great client servers. And they forget too that it's easier and takes less time to retain an existing client than it does to go out and get a new client. So the fact that we can provide really great service for these clients, and we can keep them for multiple years, make them a long-term client, that says a lot about who we are as a firm and the level of quality we provide. And also that leads to additional business development opportunities from referrals from those happy clients. There's so much benefit that comes out of really focusing on the existing client service and making sure that we're winning in that area. I think it's easy to forget that, especially people who are getting newly involved in business development and feel like that's where the success is if I'm bringing in new clients. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, I love new clients, but I love new revenue from existing clients even more. And so, and that doesn't always get celebrated when that happens as much as somebody that brings in a brand new client to the firm. Right. I've been working with marketing. We've got a really cool, way to communicate to the firm about, and we'll have like a communication every month, and who knows how long this will go. It could be indefinitely, but we're just going to tell these stories, these big success stories. And they're not all going to be somebody went out and like brought in this giant new client. They're going to be all kinds of just wins and stories of success that just sort of pull the shroud back of, oh yeah, I can do that. I may not be able to go bring in $1 million client, but I can serve well and ask insightful questions and listen to the answers.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I want to underline 2 points that you mentioned. Those are the role of having the one size fits one goals related to business development, because we can't give everybody the same goal. Like you said, we have to base it on their level of experience with business development, the level of experience just in their career, and also their level of comfort with what they're doing. And we don't want to force somebody into some sort of networking goal that they feel totally unprepared for. And so I think that's one key thing for our listeners to pay attention to, is this idea of the one size fits one goals. If this is something you're working on as a firm, building a rainmaking culture. And then the other key piece to that is what you said about the support. And so you're using the gradual release responsibility model, which is a great experiential learning model, for teaching these skills. And that's the other piece, is that we can set goals with people. We can make them one size fits one goals, but unless we provide our people with the support they need, it's going to be hard for them to achieve those goals. We're not going to see a lot of results from them. And so as a firm, that has to be part of our strategy is how do we make sure we provide support for these people and help them learn these things they're trying to do. So now tell me, I believe Hogan Taylor has 4 locations. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. 2 in Oklahoma and 2 in Arkansas.
How do you manage this aspect of affecting the culture as a firm with multiple locations? Because I know that's a common challenge we hear from other firms is, having it feel like one firm across multiple locations. And then also, these different things we're trying to implement as a firm, making sure that it happens consistently across offices. What are some things you're doing to help with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One thing I would say is, we just have an exceptional CEO. That's he's really the culture champion of the firm, and he just does a phenomenal job. Like our culture is real and it's consistent across locations, even though we've had acquisitions and things where we brought in other firms. That's just one of his like superhuman skills as a leader. But a couple of things that we do. So one, I did mention the communication. So we are using sort of an interesting video platform to do these regular communications. So it's not just an email that doesn't get read. It's something that kind of grabs attention. And so we want to make sure that we're really getting seen, and that's becoming part of the culture as we roll out this communication. But we have a couple of times a year where all of our partners get together for a day or two at one time, and that's always really special. We've got 45, I think, partners, 44 partners, something like that. And so that's really special. And so then we're all on the same page. Not that we always all agree about everything, but really, as far as what direction this firm is going, everybody is on the same page and pushing in the same direction. So it helps that we don't really have siloed partners that have completely different ideas about what Hogan Taylor should look like in 5 or 10 or 50 years. And we did another really cool thing this year at the end of 19. So our CEO, me, and 2 other partners basically did a road show to talk about business development and business advisory. And we went to each office. We went to 2 offices twice just because of their size, and 2 offices once. So we did 6 presentations, and we talked to literally every person in the firm, client facing, administrative, back office, like everybody. And that's a big investment when you talk about taking every partner, every manager, every employee out of the firm for 4 hours to talk about cultural stuff. Like that was a big deal. It impacted everyone profoundly. Like it was pretty amazing. Nobody saw this as like, oh, I've got to go to this thing. And it was really inspiring. It was kind of an aspirational deal. So that was, and we won't do that every year because that's just logistically, that's hard to pull off. But we did it. And I think that was just a great decision on Randy's part. It worked out phenomenally well and just made a big impact across the whole firm. So those are some things we've done here recently that I think lend itself to really keeping that culture cohesive.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, one of the differences I see in just hearing you talk about these things is intention around culture. And, I think that's part of it. If we don't place intention around defining what we want our culture to be and assessing it right now and getting, the temperature of our people and what they think, then really nobody's paying attention to culture. And this culture just sort of develops on its own, and it may or may not be the kind of culture we want to be working in. You are placing that intention around having a really great place to work. And regardless of location, or where you're working, that everybody feels involved and engaged in the firm. And it sounds like you guys are doing a really great job with that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, I think just sort of time and place, like we're a good size. I started my career at a Big Four firm, and so that's a different animal when you talk about messaging across your whole firm and culture.
Right.
We've got 4 offices. I think we're somewhere around 350 employees. So we're big enough that we can really make an impact in our markets, but we're small enough that we're nimble. We can talk to everybody in the firm pretty easily, and really have somebody like Randy and our other partners. They can have that real impact on culture. So that's just maybe lucky. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, but you've also learned how to grow with that, because obviously you were smaller at one point, and as you've continued to grow, you've found ways to maintain that communication, to continue these efforts around your culture. I think that's also important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to shift our conversation a little bit toward what your firm is doing on the advisory side. This is a conversation that's happening across our profession, is the importance of focusing on consulting services, focusing on advisory, and placing less of an emphasis on compliance services that may have made up the majority of our revenue at one time. So tell us a little bit about your background in terms of the consulting practice and how you joined the firm and what you're doing today with that.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. I am really in our firm, I'm unique. There's nobody else really that came in to the firm the way I did. So I was before joining Hogan Taylor, I was a CFO for a startup energy services company, and we had a private equity sponsor. And we had a plan when they hired me to be the CFO. We had a plan to build and grow that company, and then exit either through acquisition or IPO. And our target was like 5 years. And so I knew going in, and I had said, look, if we go public, I'm not a public company CFO, so I'll help us get from here to there. Then I'll exit at some point whenever that makes sense. It went very, very fast, and we were IPO ready, had gone through SEC roadshow and everything in like 30 months. That exit came much quicker than I was expecting. So I'm like, okay, I need to go find something else to do now. Well, I'd had a relationship with Hogan Taylor. I'd been their client in a previous stop in my career. Really great experience with them. And so I called Hogan Taylor and said, hey, do you have any clients that might need a CFO or that you could help introduce me to? And I actually had called Randy, who's our CEO now. He used to be an audit partner in Oklahoma City, and that's how he and I had a relationship. And he said, yeah, we've always got clients looking for good people, but I've got another idea. Let me make a couple calls and I'll get back to you. So he and another partner call me back and say, look, we've kind of launched this advisory practice in Tulsa, and we think Oklahoma City is a perfect market for it. We just haven't really got the people, or we don't have anybody to do it. Do you want to come do it? Eventually I said, yeah, sure. It sounds great. It sounded like fun, but it didn't exist. So I was going to get to kind of feel like an entrepreneur without, really having too much at risk. So sort of the best of both worlds. So I show up in November of 2014, and they give me an office and say, you have no clients, no staff, good luck. And that is like almost literally how it got started. But that's how I came into the firm. And so I'm 100% focused on advisory and consulting, and I have been since day one. We've got something like 50 or 60 people 100% dedicated to this practice. So like nobody in our group touches a tax return. We're not working on audits. We're not doing anything but serving clients in that advisory capacity. And so the firm has put a lot of resources behind really building that, that third major service prong to go along with, the audit assurance and tax side. So that's been 5 years ago. They had Tulsa started and going really well, a year or two before that. So that's kind of the history and the genesis of what's now a pretty good sized advisory practice at Hogan Taylor.
Yeah, that's great. I think one piece of the puzzle that some firms have trouble figuring out is, how do we even get started with a consulting practice? There's a whole list of consulting services that a firm could provide. How did you at Hogan Taylor decide what services to start with? And how have you decided to expand services and add new ones?
The way we started, and it's still, kind of our bread and butter, is around fractional CFO and controller engagements. And the reason that's where we started is because that's what I'd spent the last decade doing. My partner in Tulsa that preceded me and really launched the practice for the firm, he'd been a CFO. He had also started as an auditor early in his career at a Big Four firm, but he'd been a CFO for 20 something years. And so that's like what we did. In fact, Robert Wagner, who leads this practice for the whole firm, he was the CFO of a company for over 2 decades. And they went through all these acquisitions where they were buying companies, smaller, versions of themselves. And every time they went through one of these, Robert realized like this company that we bought is doesn't have everything they thought they have, or they thought they had a CFO and they don't really have a real CFO. Their books are a mess, and it ends up
Mm-hmm.
hurting their valuation. So after going through, several of these, he'd kind of formed this thesis in the back of his mind, like there's a real market here for somebody to go and be a fractional CFO, to be an advisor, kind of a strategic level person for these companies that don't really, they think they've got everything covered, but they don't. And when that becomes really clear, it's when you're going through a transaction and you go through due diligence and your valuation gets depressed. So when his company sold, and kind of like the situation I was in, he's like, okay, I got to go do something else. He and his corporate controller started a firm just with the two of them providing fractional CFO services. They did really well. Hogan Taylor saw him and said, hey, why don't you just merge in with us? And so that's how it got started. And so that's really sort of our legacy, is that CFO controller level service to clients. And we still do a lot of that. That's half or more of our advisory revenue, is that kind of annuity, like every month type engagement. And so, that's how we got started, just because that was our background. And so it was sort of the easy, place to start. Since then, we've been really strategic about adding other skill sets to our teams and going strategically after services that we know our clients need, and we want to be able to provide those. And so that's things like IT consulting around cybersecurity, even desktop support, managed services. We have human resource and human capital consulting, and we're looking to add other things as well. And transaction advisory services is huge. So we've all been through a lot of deals. We've hired other people that have real expertise around M&A consulting, and so that's how we got started, was the CFO side, and we've just kind of grown it from there by being strategic and really just kind of listening to our clients and perceiving what their biggest needs are.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly what needs to happen is, we have to look at our people and what skills they already have and what types of conversations we're having with clients. And that's the thing. A lot of firms are already doing consulting for clients. They just haven't packaged it as a formal consulting service, and so it's part of it is taking that skills inventory of our people. And part of it is looking at what we're doing with clients currently. And then what you said, as far as what do our clients need, what's missing for them. And then how do we decide who in our firm is going to take on those services and be able to become an expert in those things. And so I think that those are some places for firms to start that are trying to figure out where to go with consulting. Tell me a little about development and growth, talent wise, in a consulting practice. So, I mean, how are you guys focusing on developing up and coming talent in these consulting practices? Obviously, some of these services take a lot of time and experience to develop and be able to work with clients. And so what are you doing to bring people into these practices in your firm and then help them progress in their career?
So right now, I'd say we're pretty focused on acquiring, somebody that's already doing what we want to do, which is kind of an easier way to really get really into the market than hiring one person, kind of like they did with me, hiring one person and saying, okay, go build this, one client at a time. So we
Mm-hmm.
recently completed an acquisition of an IT consulting firm in Oklahoma City, and we're looking at other things now around marketing services. We're looking at really everything that's kind of non-compliant. So that's one of the issues, is a lot of the advisory services that our clients need are not necessarily traditional CPA type things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the transaction advisory and fractional CFO, that was right in our wheelhouse, and we've even transitioned people from other parts of the firm, from audit and tax, into advisory in a full-time way, and they are able to just make that transition really well, because it's really sort of all in that CPA world. But we're really focused right now on expanding into non-traditional services. In fact, our board says we will probably not buy any more CPA firms. Like, we're very much in the acquisition mode right now. We're looking at other service providers we can bring in to our culture, to our brand, and introduce them to our existing clients, let them keep serving the clients that they've got. And so that's been a successful model, even going back to really when they brought Robert Wagner in. on the advisory side. So that's one thing we're doing. One thing though that's been really cool is we have had some great success transitioning people that, maybe want to shift in their career or whatever, rather than losing somebody from the firm. We've had a great opportunity to bring people into advisory, keep some great talent in the firm, but give them a different kind of challenge. And it's just a very different rhythm. We work a lot of hours, probably similar hours to the other practice groups, but it's not that we don't have that compressed time frame like like a traditional busy season. So that's been really fun to be able to retain talent that in a different situation we might have just lost to industry or whatever. So, and as far as like developing skills, one thing we've done right, like since I came in and started, is we just haven't really shied away from opportunity that our clients throw at us, even if it's kind of new. And the theory is like we've got enough bench strength across the firm. Like I'm not really afraid of an industry that maybe I don't know a lot about, because we've got some people that know a lot about it. And I'm not afraid of a particular kind of engagement because somebody's going to know about it. So we've leaned pretty heavily on just hanging our hat on the fact that we've got enough people, whether they're in Little Rock or Tulsa or Oklahoma City or Fayetteville, that we can find the right resources and get them plugged in.
Right. One of the things that we have to understand is some of the differences in the way that we manage our consulting practices. And, a lot of times it's going to be project-based work and not necessarily, some of the repeated work that we would do in other practice areas of our firm. And so, so we have that piece of it that's different than a traditional practice area per se. But then also the way that we measure people is going to be different too. And so how are you managing performance? How are you measuring performance of your different consulting practice areas in terms of the people?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. I mean, it really goes back even to the bigger question that's been a trending topic for years now, which is really getting rid of the billable hour. And as a profession, like there's not very many people on the bleeding edge of that. We're probably further ahead than attorneys, but we're not there. So in advisory, it's been sort of cool because we can kind of really test some of that almost in like an incubator where it'd be a little more difficult with audit and tax. And so for me, in my practice, I don't have one single client that I bill an hour, and I really don't even manage. I don't look at hours that often. We still track it, but it's not important to me as far as how we bill and how we manage our clients and ourselves. And so it's been kind of a learning curve, but every single one of my clients is either a fixed fee, monthly arrangement or a project fee. And it's really based on, when clients say, well, how much do you charge per hour? I say, I don't charge per hour. Let's talk about outcomes and deliverables and objectives and figure out what that's worth. At the end of the day, like, does a client really care? If they need A, B, and C done, do they care that it takes 1 hour or 100? Not really.
Right.
They're really not that interested in the input. They're interested in the output. And so, so we've, spent the last 5 years really just kind of getting better at that through practice. And then as far as managing people, so this is something I think about a lot and talk to my other partners about a lot. So let's say in 2 years, I'm just making this up, but let's say Hogan Taylor just says on 1/1 of 2022, we are not going to have timesheets and we're just going to figure it out. Well, my partners will say, how do we manage poor performers, or how do we manage excellent performers if we don't have that data point? That is a challenge. But one of my responses to that is like, would you know who your poor performers are and your star performers are without looking at their timesheets? And the answer is yes, of course I would.
Right.
You just
Yes.
know, right? Because you're working with these people, you're observing. If you're a good manager, it's kind of back to the relationship thing. Like, who your good performers are. You don't need to see their timesheet to confirm that for you. So it's going to definitely be an evolution, but that's how we've been like managing performance. There's other metrics like revenue per client facing professional and things like that we manage, but to drill down to why are we not more profitable on this client, I manage that by just being present and attentive, being a good manager on that engagement. That's probably not a full answer. It's sort of where I am in a longer progression. So, I think 2 years from now, maybe I'll have more to say on that, but I think that's kind of where I am right now. Is like, you just know, right? Who's working too slow, or how come jobs aren't getting turned around,
Well, and client satisfaction, and results, that's what it comes down to, is measuring results and production outcomes and what we're expecting. And so part of it is having clarity on what those expectations are at the forefront, and then having follow-up conversations about how those expectations were met, right? And providing feedback and helping people grow and progress. But I think the more we start to focus on those types of measures and that type of performance, it places more trust in our people. And honestly, I think we get more out of our people that way than when we feel like we're being watched for the hours we're putting in. And my 5 hours of time is going to lend to different results than, the person sitting next to me in terms of what they produce. And so I think that's obviously one of the challenges that comes with focusing on hours so much. And so, I'm glad the shift is happening. I think that your practice is a perfect place to be, kind of testing it out, like you said, and seeing how it goes. And I think it's one of those things that you kind of learn as you go, and you have to keep having conversations about what's working and what's not working, and figure out what small changes you can make over time. And, we're not going to just change the entire firm's performance structure and how we're managing things, but you can use this as a little pilot area for what you're trying to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've already raised my hand and said we will be the beta in the firm for no timesheets. So I'm just waiting for somebody to say that's okay.
Really great. And I appreciate the time here today and you talking about these different things that you're doing as a firm and sharing with our listeners some of these best practices that you've learned along the way. And so we really appreciate it. I have a couple questions for you, a couple rapid fire questions, if that's okay.
Yep, you bet.
Okay, so these are just fun questions for us to learn a little bit more about Aaron. So if you could not work for 1 year, what would you be doing with your time?
Well, our family loves to travel, and I love to read. So I'm going to say we would probably, my wife loves the beach. We'd probably do some traveling, go to the beach, and for a year, I would probably try to read 50 books in a year if I didn't have to work.
Nice. Yeah. And in beautiful locations. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you knew you could not fail, what would you do?
I would, that's a good one. I don't really want to be the president, but if I couldn't fail, maybe I would run for president. I've got all these ideas I think are really good. It'd be fun to go figure out if they are or not.
Yeah, definitely. That's a position in the spotlight for sure. So great. All right. Well, anything else that you want to share with our listeners today?
No, I mean, I think I know there's a lot of firms out there like us that are really kind of looking at the future and trying to make sure that we're positioned to be not just relevant, but really highly valuable to our clients. And things are going to be disrupted with automation, and I'm excited. I think that these kinds of conversations are great. I know they're probably happening all over the place, and so I appreciate you asking me to be on the podcast and just share our experience. And certainly, we don't have it all figured out, but I think we've got our eyes wide open, so we're trying to go boldly into the future.
Yeah. Well, you've come a long way in a short amount of time too, it sounds like, with what you guys are doing there on the consulting side. And I think, that's a differentiator for your firm and just your mindset on where you're going with these practice areas and what you're wanting to help clients with, I think is really great. So I appreciate you being here with us today. I'm excited for our listeners to hear these different things that we've discussed. And I just want to thank you for your time. So we really appreciate it, Aaron.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Convergence Coaching Inspired Ideas podcast. Be sure to visit ConvergenceCoaching.com to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. Have an inspired day.